Hi, everybody. Welcome to Talking Data Equity for Friday, May 2nd. My name is Heather Krause, and I am a mathematical statistician, and I'm the founder of an organization called We All Count. And the purpose of We All Count is to build tools and provide support and training to anybody that is working on a data project that would like to align the way that they're doing that data project, the choices that are happening in that data project with their equity priorities, with the values that they're trying to center in the context in which they're working. And one of the things that we do on a regular basis here at We All Count is this event, Talking Data Equity. And Talking Data Equity is a time when anybody from any country in any sector at any level of technological experience or interest can come together and talk about practical, concrete ways to embed equity in our data projects. And every single Friday is different. Some Fridays, we're going to go in depth into like a statistical technique, how to write R code to handle the new race categories in the United States Census, or what's Bayesian analysis and would it be useful to my community or my project. And sometimes we talk about specific projects, and sometimes we have special guests. And you can keep up with what is going on in terms of upcoming guests by visiting the Talking Data Equity main page, which I just put into the chat. So we try and keep that updated so you can decide on a weekly basis whether or not you are interested and want to come. And we also do record it, and we put those recordings into the We All Count Data Equity Forum, which is a public good. That's a free site that you can check out and ask questions and also watch the videos. And today we have a very special guest that I am extremely excited about and have been excited about for months. So before I introduce the guest, let me just do a little tiny bit of logistics. We're going to turn it over to our special guest in just a couple of seconds. And what we're going to ask is, while our special guest is presenting slides and stories and examples, that you keep your microphone on mute and you keep your microphone turned off, because there's more than 100 of us here in a meeting, and it's going to get distracting. Feel free to use the chat. You can use the Zoom chat to ask questions, make comments. You can also direct message me if you'd like to ask a question privately. But we're going to ask you to keep your microphone turned off while our special guest is presenting. And then, time allowing, we'll have kind of a microphone turned on question and answer period. And I think that's enough from me. So I am going to turn it over to our special guest. And our special guest is somebody that I have known for many, many years. Rahul is one of the first people that I really got to know in terms of the data visualization community. And he really opened my eyes to how so many of the kind of rules that I was learning at the time of data viz were actually not rules and were actually not that helpful. And one of the things I love about Rahul is that he's very involved in aligning the rhetoric with what he actually does and what he actually builds. And so I'm really, really excited he can join us today. And the formal bio is Rahul is an educator, designer, and artist working on creative data storytelling and computational journalism in support of social justice and community empowerment. He creates murals, data murals, and theater with communities, award-winning museum exhibits, AI-powered civic technologies with civic sector organizations, and delivers hands-on workshops and keynote talks across the globe. His first book, Community Data, Creative Approaches to Empowering People with Information, is now available. And we will link to lots of these things, because if you haven't seen some of Rahul's work, you should check it out. It is very cool. He currently leads the data culture group at Northeastern University as an assistant professor in journalism, art, and design. So I'm so happy that you were able to make time in your schedule to join us, Rahul, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you for the intro, Heather. As Heather mentioned, it's been years that we've been sort of circling and dancing, and it's nice to come together again for for a conversation that hopefully is relevant to this group of people that you've been building, which I think is fantastic. So, as Heather mentioned, I'm here in Boston at Northeastern, where I teach now, and I want to talk about problems I see in the sort of normal way we work with data in community settings. And I want to do it in a way that sort of touches on some points that I've brought together in the book that's just come out, which I will do a more gratuitous plug for at the end of the talk. But hopefully appeal to people that are finding that the standard way of working with data just isn't clicking with the context and the settings that you're working in, and hopefully give you some processes and some examples that inspire alternatives to help you sort of push outside a little bit that standard toolbox and do it in ways that connect you and hopefully resonate and push your work forward. Um, I lead a group here called the Data Culture Group, and I've been at Northeastern for about 4 years, and I was at another university for about 10 years before that. And then I worked in industry before that. So, like a lot of you, I'm sure my career has sort of been like this, but it's always been around and connected to like working with community in some way and trying to use technology or build technologies that help groups achieve their goals in community settings. So, in many ways, just talking about how data can do that it comes very naturally to me, or asking a certain set of questions about that comes very naturally to me. Maybe not having all the answers, but at least asking the questions. Um, and I'll start with a bar chart. So this is a bar chart of Chicago's 2020 budget. You've probably seen a lot of bar charts like this. Each bar is a different category of expenditures in the budget, and the vertical axis is how much money they spent in that category. As you can see, the top bar is the police department. It's from 2020, a time in the US when there were major protests arguing that that budget needed to be reallocated. The primary goals of the defund the police movement were to take that money at city levels and redistribute it to social services like housing and the public health and the other tiny things you see down there on the right. And this is like you see a lot of budget charts like this to spark conversations as people talk about budgets are lists of priorities and values. Um, and it's hard to get people to talk about a bar chart, just like, especially if you're out on a street or something, you show somebody your bar chart and they'll just like, I mean, it's really, it maybe evokes me and makes me interested, but I think maybe for a larger set of people, it's not as evocative. So, um, So a group in Chicago, BYP 100, decided to do something different. They were part of this protest movement, and they created the same bar chart. So if you look at these vertical bars, of these are stacked cardboard boxes, some painted green, some brown. It's the same chart, right? So look at those orange lines, and look at these, same exact chart, right? And it's showing the same thing. And they were on the street as part of a protest. You can see they're using the microphone there. And I just want to talk for a minute about the difference between this and this. And the salient one for me is first, yes, it's big, which is cool. It's made out of physical materials. That's cool. It makes you want to walk up to it and say, what is that? The slightly more informal presentation of data makes people want to ask questions. And there's some research about that in psychology. More importantly for me, the material they used is a stack of cardboard boxes. Um, and it might seem trivial as a choice, but if we look at these boxes, they're very rigid. They don't look like they can be changed, right? You can't squish a box easily or like tear off a piece. Cardboard boxes, as this gentleman is doing on the left here, you can just grab one and move it from one stack to another. Right? So the material they picked to present this data lent itself to the idea that budget could be moved more easily. Right? When you see a stack of cardboard boxes, you think, oh, I can change this. I can just move this box over there. And if you think about what their goals were, the goal to empower and suggest to people that the budget could and should be changed. The media lined up with the goals, right? So the cardboard boxes reinforce the goal that change is possible. And I think that's a salient, important distinction. And that's why I think things like this are not designed around the goals and needs of community settings like this. And that is essentially like the 2-minute summary of the whole book. That's just one example that tries to illuminate that. The rest of the talk is going to talk about like pieces of why. But if you take away one thing, just take away like the difference between this and this, right? And that question is one to ask yourself: is the tool I'm picking out of my toolbox to tell this data story or bring people together on data, is it aligned with my goals? And my hypothesis is that by default it is not. So why is that? I think it's because data has moved into new domains, right? Um, so how did we get here? We're used to seeing things like this. You've probably seen famous Hans Rosling Gapminder chart, right? It's like animated bubbles showing you life expectancy, and it doesn't matter what it is. It's a visual encoding with circles and colors and lines and a Cartesian coordinate system. And these methods came to maturity in fields like statistics, sciences, economics, epidemiology. Um, and it led to situations like this quote from Eduardo Galeano that I like a lot. He's an Uruguayan writer. This is from the Book of Embraces. He also writes a lot about soccer, if you want to read more of his writing. But this quote, I think, is lovely. It says, in Central America, the more wretched and desperate the people, the more the statistics smiled and laughed. So this abstract quantification doesn't always represent the reality on the ground. And that's sort of where maturity, the data methods we use, matured. So if you look at this diagram, this visual version of that, the things on the left are very different sectors than the things on the right. And so let me name those, right? So the original fields might be sciences, statistics, business. This is where charts and graphs, surveys, spreadsheets came to maturity. Not where they started, but it's where our current methods really were matured. And the new domains where they're being used are things like those street protests, nonprofits, libraries, museums, government, civic areas, probably the sectors a lot of you work in. And I think that's important to make that difference because the goals of those two things are different, right? The goals of knowledge production, centralized planning are very different than like efficacy, justice, or joy. And these aren't necessarily in conflict, but they're very different lists. And I think that points to the fact that like the cultures we have for using data don't fit what I talk about as the pro-social sector usages, those things like the libraries and the local government and things like that. And it, to me, over the last 15 years, that made me realize we need a bigger toolbox. Our toolbox of charts and graphs and surveys might be this big, but we need something bigger because we need to look at the context in our goals and then pick the right tool out from the toolbox to match it. And just to put a even finer point on it, that matters because of the difference between these two types of pictures, right? Data is very often used within power structures to make decisions about social contexts. And I think it's a stretch to say that the bar chart is an oppressor of the masses, but like statistics came out of like really oppressive regimes. So if you look at the history of some of these tools, they connect to racism, they connect to white supremacy. That's where these statistical techniques were invented. So we have to acknowledge that if you're talking about using these techniques in settings that are focused on empowerment, participation, or social change. And that's the difference between these two things. I think we need to do less of the bar charts and more of the creative thinking. So how do we do that? That's going to be the rest of the talk, just to give you some examples so that it feels more possible and hopefully more normal that people are doing this type of work. So I want to center around 5 main principles. If this looks like the outline of a book, you're right. It is the outline of my book. And I want to give you an example of each of these principles that I think helps think through why and how to do this work. So first, I think I want to focus on social impact, right? In community settings, and you could take a broad definition of those. The impact of whatever sharing or engagement you're doing around data matters. And I want to tell um, a short story about learning from these institutions, like the libraries, like the museums, like the local governments. And this just to let people know, this example is going to touch on issues of like violence against women and violence against other people. So to get into the story, I want to take you all to Mexico, to a small town where a documentary was being made about the disappeared. So these are people that men, women that have been killed, presumably kidnapped, and there are collectives throughout Mexico. If some of you are from there, you know this. Like Las Estrellas del Fuerte, that basically are collectives of mothers that are searching for their disappeared, living or most times dead. And Marta Munoz Aristizabal was an artist and media activist and data scientist who was working with that documentary, trying to think about how to bring more attention to this problem of the disappeared. And she started collecting in a WhatsApp group. She started collecting after she met these mothers images and messages from these mothers. And you see one of the messages there, lo busca su mamá, no te voy a fallar, te amo, which is the message that they would want to say to them if they found them ever. Your mother's looking for you. I will not fail you. I love you. Um, just deeply, like, just really like heartbreaking, meaningful work. So she collected, they were sharing the stories and the things they would want to say to their missing loved one if they found them. And that's data production, right? That's a spreadsheet. You can see the Word version of that spreadsheet right behind it there. And she wanted to bring that to life in a media engagement, this data set that they had built together, right, of missing people. So they created this amazing, evocative art piece where they made these sort of silicone balls with a photo and the message inside of them. You see the video of that in the middle there. And then each of these balls, they did it for about 50 women. They worked with a CSO to create a protest on, very relevant to now, on Mother's Day, which is upcoming in the US. And they cast these resin balls. And then on the left, you can see here, they got these bowls and they put dirt from wherever that person was born. The mothers collected that dirt and put it in the bowl. And then they put the ball in the bowl. And you have this thing that feels a lot like, it's very evocative of the womb, right? It just sort of has that visual imagery. And then they brought it to the city. They brought these 50 mothers and they marched across the city to one of these sites, which is now a site for being used as a site for remembrances like this. And I think it's in the Plaza de Independencia. I don't know the FA that well, so someone can correct me. But they basically led a powerful march and protest that used the physical representation of that data that they had collected, the photos and the messages in physical form to create a physical action in real space to try to bring attention to the plight of these mothers and of these missing. Um, that to me is an example of like centering impact, right? The idea that they wanted to raise and showcase the pain and the hurt and the loss to a larger audience. And the best tool they knew for doing that was art and public spectacle, not a bar chart. Right? So sometimes that data needs to be presented in a different way when impact is your primary goal. So that's the first example. Um, Next example, in community settings, this one is a little more playful. So let's move on from the sort of depressing ones to playful ones. In community settings, participation is very often the key. Very often you're using data as a thing to bring people together for some other goals. It's a means to an end. So I think we need to have techniques that are more participatory. Um, and I don't just mean in data production. Like if you model data as a pipeline from like a linear pipeline from production to story finding to storytelling to like sharing it, there's points at every spot to engage people, including in the analysis. For this example, I want to talk a little bit about what working with data looks like. And when we have something like the left, the spreadsheet, it privileges a certain type of people. that are able to engage with data in that form. Whereas when you have something that looks on the right, looks like the right, which is also a spreadsheet, it engages a very different set of people who are ready and able to participate. So as we think about engaging people, not everyone needs to be a data scientist to participate into with data. And there's been a lot of work on putting data in public space. These are a couple of examples from various people about like, putting data on walls and things like that to engage with sort of urban planning. And in my own practice, we've built a sort of a merging of participatory community murals and data storytelling. And we call these data murals. I know it's a shocking name. um, and they look something like this. We bring people together around a small data handout we've built with a key set of partners. And then we help them move from a data set to a story, and then from a story to a visual representation of that story. And then we paint it as a community mural. So this merges the rhetorical power of community art to sort of influence and shift conversation, and the participatory processes of story finding, storytelling, and visual design. This is work with my wife, Emily, who is an artist and a facilitator. That's her down in the bottom right. And this is a mural about the impact of some urban farms in my town that I live in, Somerville, north of Boston. And if you look at the top of it, you can see the story that is very like infographic-y, created by youth in a local groundwork Somerville organization. And it tells a story of, poor eating habits, impacting health in the community, and then a lot of empty lots, like parking lots. And then they made raised beds in those parking lots to grow vegetables. And then they farm those vegetables and they sell it for super cheap at a mobile market. And they have youth work that land who say things like, before working here, I never actually ate vegetables, but now I know vegetables taste good. Right? Combine that with a bunch of school kids that also visit the lot occasionally, and it equals together living better. And some of the key outcomes of this mural effort were the network of people that came together to build it, not just the mural itself, the learning among the youth who actually participated in creating it. So sometimes the participatory process itself is the goal, and data is used to bring people together around it. If you're curious about how to do this, this is documented in a paper and on our website. If you go to datamurals.org, you can check it out. We've done about a dozen of these, and they've inspired murals in lots of other places, including like a whole bunch of them around public health issues in like northeastern Africa, in Tanzania and Kenya and other places. So this one has connected to public health issues quite a bit and public health communication. Okay, so next piece. I want to argue that we should build mirrors, not windows. And by that, I mean that the most data projects are about looking through a window at some other group and then extracting that data to make some judgments that then impact that group's lived conditions. And that window point of view, I think, is very disempowering. So instead, I argue we should create mirrors. I don't know if that works for you. Mirrors, it works for me. We should create mirrors where we can see ourselves in the data, make our own judgments about what that says and what we should change. And I think it's connected to this idea of like lots of things are being datafied. And we're trying to help people like learn how to use data. But again, does it look like that computer spreadsheet or like something on paper on the wall? Like, how can they access that? And those are questions of data literacy. So the example here I want to give of making a mirror starts during COVID. So this is a chart from a public government document of SNAP applications. So this is government assistance for food purchasing. So you get a little like debit card and you can use that to buy groceries, administered by the states in the U.S. This is during the peak of the pandemic in 2020 in the US. And what you see is a huge increase in the daily applications to people saying, hey, households saying, I need help with money for food because I lost my job, my business is closed. And then it falls off because you see like a government response, like the government responded with a federal program in the US. But The data point here that we thought was salient was that an average of 1,659 households every day applied for SNAP benefits in Massachusetts, in the state I live in, which is like a shockingly big number, but like almost understandable. Like 1,600 households. It's not unfathomable. So we wanted to get people engaged on that. We wanted to help build a mirror to show us what was happening in Massachusetts. So again, this is also work with my wife. We made a data sculpture, and this data sculpture is called 1659. Remember that number from here, 1659. This is a welded table made out of 1,659 pieces of cutlery. Um, so it weighs about 150 pounds, which just makes it very hard to move for installations. Um, but it's a full size table. It seats six. Um, and it's just all welded cutlery, most of which we got from friends and Craigslist leftovers and things like that. And our goal here, again, thinking about mirrors, right? Our goal here as community members was to create a story about what was happening in our community and then take it places to show to other people, to activate them based on the data, to engage with food security and hunger and questions like that. So we took it to farmers markets where it helped people sign up for SNAP. We took it to art galleries in affluent communities where it would help people learn that that was a problem in their community, not just somewhere else. Um, we had it at public gatherings to talk to political leaders about changes they could make. And it's been touring for about, I guess, toured for about, it's been about 4 years now. So it's been off and on. When it's not touring, it's in our garage. But we just showed it again recently at a public event here in Boston. And it sits in a larger history of data sculptures. So this goes back to, if you know the famous example of the Brooks slave ship, famous like first public infographic. Um, they actually, there's an untold story there where Wilberforce, who was driving that, made a boat that also was a data sculpture about the same data. But you might have seen during COVID an empty chair memorial, right? That's using a physical encoding of the data. So some people call that a physicalization instead of visualization, physicalization. If you remember Cuomo's COVID mountain from those daily briefings at the same time, I'm sorry to take you back to those 4 years, those dark times, but there was a lot of physical encodings of data happening. And I think there's something about physical data that makes it really good for being a mirror, a data mirror. Okay, I want to talk about two more principles. And again, hopefully, like these examples, if you take away two or three of them that connect to your work or inspire you, that was part of my goal. So, building layers of reading. So here, this table has one number, right? And it helps you get into it, but it doesn't tell more detail. If you want to get into more detail about the story, you got to go to something else. In our case, there's like a website that has videos and a data explainer and things like that. But how to use layers of reading to get people into a data story, but not overwhelm them with data right away is a really important question. And I think this is where our existing toolbox falls on its face most pointedly. Um, the visual norms I talk about as a tyranny of the 2D, right? So there's like this set of rules that can feel like, like blinders on a horse. They kind of feel like that sometimes, where you're not allowed to do things outside of that. And I really think it limits what counts as data viz. And that's problematic. I think if you read Alberto Cairo's recent work, he speaks to this more directly, arguing for multiple dialects visualization. Again, not arguing that one is wrong, but saying we need to allow for multiple dialects of data storytelling, which I think is a great way of talking about it. So the one I want to share with you is, again, a very playful approach. This one's inspired by the LAPD, not that one, the other one, the Los Angeles Poverty Department. And this is just some history here. This is a group in Los Angeles in the US that organized in Skid Row, which is a historically like marginalized part of town where there are a lot of drifters in the 1800s that then became a center of the unhoused population there. And the city keeps trying to get rid of it and make it high-rise apartments, right? But this unhoused community is really organized and it's very resilient. So the LAPD is part of that resilience and organizing group. And they have a theater troupe made up completely of unhoused people, which they believe is the only one in the world. Um, and they create theatrical productions. So the last time, or maybe like two times ago, when the city tried to legislate out Skid Row, they came together and said, no, we need to fight back. And they fought back in two really interesting ways. One is what you're seeing here, a playable data mini golf course, which to me, I saw this and my jaw just went, because I love mini golf. It's like my jam. I take my kids to every single one we pass in the US. I could give a 40-minute lecture about the history of mini golf in the US, but that's a different day. They created a playable mini golf course. If you haven't played mini golf, it's usually like whimsical, delightful putting, and there's like little things in the way, and you go around them and try to get the ball in the hole with a putter. Um, and they did that to mock the leaders who were making decisions about the city on golf courses in outfits like this gentleman is wearing, like cheesy golf outfits. And I mean, legalistically, they're right. 3 years after this, half of the city council, 2/3 of the city council was in prison. So, like, they were making illegal deals. This data mini golf course was used as a set to do a theatrical performance where they mocked how the decision making was happening about their community, right? So they created multiple layers in. So you could just come play this mini golf course and have fun, or you could come and read the signs and understand that all the obstacles were actually a data representation about the housing stock, the shrunk area of zoning that would be allowed for unhoused people, the increase, the increase in population and the decrease in housing stock. If you wanted to learn more, you could come to one of the evening performances where they told the story through theatrical production. Um, so they allowed layers of engagement, and it uses the power of play and fun to bring people in. They have a physical site in Skid Row, so they took advantage of that anchor. And I think there's something here about the theater, because theater has often been used as a way to help people come together around hard issues. If you know about theater of the oppressed work in Brazil from Augusto Baul, or if you know about some of the other work that's happening represented here, there's a tradition of performance through embodiment that brings people into issues that otherwise are taboo or hard to talk about. So we're playing with that here at Northeastern. There's a data theater collaborative that we just got a big Mellon grant, Mellon Foundation grant, to explore this as an alternate approach to civic engagement. So if anyone's interested in exploring that in their setting, let us know. We're trying to argue that the traditional civic meeting in the US, like an evening PowerPoint presentation or like a big boardroom style Q&A or commentary, is broken for lots of different populations, particularly folks that otherwise can't engage in that or have challenges or barriers. So, an alternative is you create a 20-minute theatrical production that gets into an issue based on data, like green space and gentrification in Boston. That's the one we're working in. They're at tension quite often. And then you host a 30-minute facilitated deliberation afterwards, which is a standard theatrical technique. So bring together this idea of data performance and deliberation to create the idea of civic data theater. And our hypothesis is that this can connect and engage people that are otherwise left out of civic data-centered decision-making processes. So there's a big team working on this from across like participatory planning, data journalism, theater, and we're working on that here. We're very excited to be spinning that up this summer, and we'll work on that over the next year and a half. And for us, we see theater as a way to get people in the door to that layers of meaning, right? So that you can have an introduction that isn't like, look at all this data, but it rather like holds your hand and pulls you into an issue that is data connected. So the last piece is about opening more doors. And I think again, like that spreadsheet, it's a doorway that works for me, but it doesn't work for lots of people. So we need to work harder in community settings to think outside of that traditional toolbox to create more doorways. So this one is even more playful. Like, why do we just work on visualization? Like, why is that a thing? Why is there not more physicalization, which I already touched on? Smellification, edibilization, sonification. We live in a multisensory world. yet we privilege the visual in so much of our data communication. And I think that's to our detriment as people that want to engage others around data or tell stories around data. And this matters because while the visual might be good for some things in terms of cognitive processing and ability, there is more parts of our brain that are afforded connectivity to the visualization piece. At the same time, our other senses are better at things like triggering memories, connecting to culture, evoking experiences, getting you into a curious or reflective mindset. The other senses work better for certain types of things. So we can take advantage of that. And there's a lot of work on that. Here's some examples. If you know the famous Data Cuisine project from Stefano and Joshko, um, and even still, much of their work was visual. It was like a visual representation of food, not taking advantage of the flavors as much. This example does, but some of the other aspects. Smells are often used in museums to evoke ambiance and things like that. Um, my colleague here in the Center for Design, Paolo Cicurelli, is doing a lot of work on sonification and creating a sonification archive to talk about sound-based encodings to tell stories. And there's a lot to do here, so I'm trying to contribute. And my way of contributing is to connect to the piece of my identity where I'm a drummer. I've been playing drum for a long time. I play in a Brazilian drum troupe here in Boston. I was actually out drumming at a rally yesterday for May Day. So I worked with Marcus, you can see there on the right. Marcus Santos is a professional musician and runs a drum troupe here that I play with. And we created Data Drums, a live performed data sonification. You can see us playing it in the bottom right there. And it's a story about climate emissions in the US, Brazil, and India, each of which has like really unique rhythmic traditions. We just debuted it a couple weeks ago here at Northeastern, and it's about a 20-minute show where it's like I play the role of a professor. You can see me in the top right, like in my professor outfit, like giving a lecture that otherwise would be really boring, but this band is like interrupting me and playing data encoding based performances. So they're playing the emissions in various ways. And it sort of elaborates into a story over those 20 minutes where we come together to talk about how we must work together to fight climate change. And to me, the goal here is to look at how live performance can impact of music can tell data stories and bring people together. And in our case, like the fact that you can feel the emissions, right? When there's 15 drums playing in a small room, like you feel the emissions in your bones and it affects you differently. So I'm starting to sort of lay this groundwork and do some academic work on the sort of the impacts and how they compare. Um, but that to me is an example of another doorway, opening another door. Someone's going to come to this that might not come to your PowerPoint presentation or read your report. Because it just is a very different way of accessing that knowledge. So when you put those 5 principles together, the thing you end up with, the centering impact, focusing on participation, building mirrors, not windows, creating layers of reading, and opening doors. You end up with something that I talk about as popular data because I'm an academic and we have to name things. So I named it popular data. If you know educational theory, it's sort of based on Paulo Freire and work like that in terms of that version of popular. If you don't worry about it. And the core argument, again, is getting back to that bar chart, right? Like just doing a little bit less of that, unless, if you're in a boardroom and you're trying to convince your funders, then use the bar chart. That's the right thing. But in community settings, that's usually not where you are. You're usually trying to provoke participation and questioning and engagement and empowerment and joy. And I think that the approaches that I've got in my book, Community Data, help with that. So if you're interested, Community Data book has more information about the book. It's on sale now, and it's full of sort of global examples from multiple sectors. I mean, a lot of them are public health, but a lot of them are community engagement more broadly. Um, some of the theory behind it that hopefully is useful to you if you work in local government, public health, nonprofits, or libraries or museums or newsrooms. A lot of journalism examples that I highlight today. Then hopefully they connect and are resonant and valuable for you. But I'll stop there, maybe, Heather. I love
Right?
talking about this stuff, but I think I'd love to hear some of the feedback. I can't really do chat and talking, so I haven't been looking at the chat at all. So I don't
Of
know if you want
course.
to field stuff and surface it for me, or
Yeah, I definitely
I'll
will.
stop
Thank
share.
you so much, Rahul. That was an amazing talk. You couldn't see in the chat, but the positive feedback and just enthusiastic appreciation for putting words into, senses of uncomfortableness that so many of us feel but can't quite put our finger on, was it's just such a valuable contribution to all of our work. And one thing that was happening in the chat was people were actively buying the book. They were like, okay, I've seen enough,
Oh,
buying the book. So
oh, or
I
get it from your library.
and I
Another
was
shout
gonna
out.
say that
Yeah,
if you go to that link, Rahul's done such a cool thing where you can buy the book and you can check if it's in your local library, which is also just what I mean by
shout out to the
how great you
libraries.
are at staying congruent between what you say and what you do. And it's just such a rare thing. And I could just sing your praises for the rest of the
Oh,
time that we have together.
oh, I see
Um,
so many examples that are actually ones I know, and that I love that people are shouting out to work that has influenced me, like Duarte's work, Photo Voice for sure, definitely Chang's murals. Yeah, oh, so much great work that people are sharing. I love it. I find that so inspirational, and it drives my own work.
Absolutely. And for people who don't know what those various terms mean, we're going to put all those links into the data equity forum so that if you're interested, you can continue because there are so many cool examples. Um, Okay, so is there anybody in the room that would like to turn their microphone on and ask a question? There are some questions in the chat that I will amplify, but we always really want to give you an opportunity when you're in the room to go ahead and turn your microphone on. If you want to do that, you can use the little Zoom reaction button to kind of raise your Zoom hand, or if that doesn't feel right to you, you can turn your microphone on. There's enough of us. Jennifer, hey.
Yes, hi there. My question is, when we are having interactive meetings that are virtual and online with teams, so we're having meetings that are like agency wide, but then we're also asking for community participation. So we've got the community member who's joined us in a virtual meeting, and what are some ways outside of the 3D world to incorporate some of these accessible and welcoming data visualizations into our 2D space that is both like agency and data wonks as well as community members and the public?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we live so many times in these sort of virtual settings. As you said, as you sort of pointed out implicitly in my examples, so many of them are off screen. That's very important for me because I think there's better opportunities for engagement there. And at the same time, I don't mean to dismiss the opportunity and power of virtual engagement, which for some audiences is more accessible. So, how can you engage people in those settings around data? I think a couple things. One, there are now like large, well-established tools that allow for sort of like the fun, like polling type stuff, and that works really well to do if many of you are from public health, to do things like social norming type work where you ask people what they think the answer is to some question, and then you see that, oh, 50% of the people think it's B, actually it's C. And that's important because it lets everyone know in the room that most people don't understand, and here's what the actual thing is. So it gives you two things you can work with. So I think those, are well established. I think there's more creative ones too, which is I tend to do things like I do 5 minute desktop data sculptures where I say like, okay, wherever you are, your kitchen, whatever, here's like one like line chart or a bar chart. Make something physical that shows it and put it in front of your screen. Um, and then I also do like sticky note, like if you have a
Mhm.
piece of paper and a pen, draw this and then hold it up, and then I do a screenshot of that, and then I show the whole thing back. So
Mm,
there's a couple things like that I do. I will say that my focus is not that, but those are ones
yeah.
that either I've done or I've seen.
All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate that because as we're seeking that community involvement, it feels back like the 2020 trying to do school online days, and you're trying to have these like novel and engaging ways of
Yeah.
interacting, but at the same time, you're limited by the field. And so I love your data visualizations and the 3D element of them. And I was just wondering, like, if you had any tips for bringing that into the 2D world. So thank you.
Yeah. And then I think perhaps on the chat, if people want to share what's worked for them, that might be great too.
Concur. That's a great question. A lot of people said that was their exact question. So thank
Mhm.
you so much, Jennifer, for raising it. Go ahead, Leslie. It's great to see you.
Hey everybody, yeah, great to be here. Man, what a fantastic presentation. I was wondering, so my risk averse side of me comes up when I think about doing things like murals and public art and things like that. Do you, in your experience, have you had to like get a permit and then again, you're back working with the power struggles and on the other hand, hopefully creating good relationships with the people that can permit you? How do you do that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. Logistics are real, and they're hard. In general, the community groups that I've worked with, like that's they already know how to do that, right? Because they do
Okay.
stuff like that already, right? They're doing public events and they understand the challenges of it. It's not a new challenge. Muraling is harder because muraling involves like permissioning, especially with participatory community murals. Then there's if you're a muralist or you know a muralist, it's really hard because they don't the person that you need to get permission to paint it to paint the wall wants to see the design. And you say, well, no, it's a community design. I won't know it till we're painting it. And they say, what the hell? No way. So getting community mural permission is very challenging. Um,
Yeah.
and this is true, like whether it's a data mural or not. That said, what you can do is paint the mural on canvas or paint it on boards, like big 4x8s. And then that actually allows for like the physical participation to be easier because you're not going on ladders or scaffolding.
Okay,
And
yeah.
then you assemble it into place either as a permanent or temporary mural. So
Mhm.
if you're stuck on that, and then there's even weird zoning rules about like if you have text on the mural, then it has to go before like the zoning board because they have rules about depending where you are, they have rules about marketing and advertisement.
Mhm.
So there's all sorts of local things, but just find a local muralist and they know that.
Yeah.
And then you can work with them, right? That's generally my approach is to find the people that know how to solve a problem. And this is like, this is not something that I'm the expert in. Community groups I work with are the expert in that. They know the network.
Good point. Thank you so much.
Great question, Leslie. Thank you. Dana. Hi.
Thank you. Good morning. And thank you very much for that engaging demonstration and explication of how we can engage community with data. Um, my question involves logistics and, we represent data. So there's two parts to my question. One part to my question is, um, as a scientist, I tend to think of myself as presenting data very dispassionately. And the two-dimensional bar chart gives me that sort of separation from, my intellectual self from my emotional self. And as you correctly point out, that completely strips away a lot of the impact of the importance of our data. Um, so when I was looking at the mini golf example, it got me thinking about how to relatively easily create objects from data that could be used to represent that data. And I wonder if you know of anybody who is, for example, I'm thinking about could I use a 3D printer to print out data in a sort of object three-dimensional space as opposed to
Yeah.
printing out the data in a two-dimensional space. So that's my question.
Yeah.
Any knowledge of
Yeah.
that?
So there's a lot of questions in there actually that I would pull out. The first one is about like this concept of sort of objective or abstract or more objective representations. And I think that I tend to say that that every data set has a point of view already embedded in it. So that doesn't mean we can't use it. It just means that we need to acknowledge the point of view. And if I put on my academic hat for a second, the rhetorical power of something like a chart is very, very high because it looks truthy, because it looks objective and scientific. And I tend to critique that. I say, like, no, it's not. Like, there's a bunch of biases that are being hidden, even in like the colors you picked or the order you chose. So like I tease out, I just love to deconstruct or tease it out a little bit, but separately from that. So the representations in 3D of data. So there are people that are doing 3D printed charts, and most data sculptures, I think, are like charts in 3D. I tend to, take the counterpoint to say, like, we can do better than that, right? Like the cardboard bar chart is interesting not because it's 3D, but because it's made out of boxes. So you can 3D print charts, and in fact, there's research that shows that in scientific settings, 3D printed charts support like analysis tasks more readily than a 3D on a screen version. So if you ask someone to find like the time series with the greatest increase in whatever the unit is, people are better at solving that with a 3D object than with the virtual version of that. So there are advantages in scientific settings to that, but those aren't the goals of like community settings. So there's a couple different layers there.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
That's a great question. And also you're very helpful and always concrete answer. Rahul answered a couple of the other outstanding questions in the chat. I'm just going to tag on to the very last thing you were talking about, which is that there's some research that in the kind of a scientific setting, if you allow people to use a 3D chart, then they can perform certain types of tasks more effectively. Are you aware if there's any research about retention, or like to your first point about impact? I ask now with your academic hat on, I think, kind of summarizing some of the stuff in the chat. Are you aware of any kind of this works better to help people retain academic style research?
I'll take one step back from that question and say that maybe I'll start with an example. So we know that when you're so I work in data journalism a lot. I'm in a journalism school, I teach that. And one of the things we know from studies of charts and news is that the title and any annotations, right, like arrows with text pointing at them, effectively writing those creates the biggest increase in recall, right? So someone's ability later to remember what the chart is saying, right? So your title in journalism, that's always like a short version of the story. It's not like, temperature increase in the last 10 years. It's more like temperature is rising in the last 10 years. So like the story in the title, that's what people remember. So my takeaway from that is that the story is the thing you want to emphasize on. And that drives people remembering things. So if you use a chart, that's great. Put in some arrows, make the title the story, not what the data is, what the data tells you. And that will drive recall and memory in more traditional charts and graphs. And I would say, like, I think this is on me. I need to do a better job of building the evidence base for saying, like, the sculpted table made out of 1,659 pieces of cutlery is more memorable than the bar chart, right? Like, I see it as obvious, but I think in academic settings, I need to like do that A/B comparison and like show it. So I think that's a bit on me.
Well, it's a heavy lift. And
we have ways to do that kind of comparison.
Yep.
So I think that's maybe something I should do over the next year or two.
Yeah. Well, let us know when you do it. If you want support, this is always a community of people with some interesting resources that can help design studies like that. And yes, a literal heavy lift, exactly.
You can see my wife and I putting that in our trunk of our car. It's amusing, but we've got a system down.
That is so cool. Well, I think we're going to leave it there. I would love to spend the entire afternoon chatting with you about all of your insights. And there's a couple of people in the chat that definitely want to know when your History of Mini Golf in the US tour chat is ready because they want to attend that.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
it
good.
meant
Don't tempt me. That'll be my next book.
yeah, exactly. Um, Before I say goodbye to Rahul, I just want to remind you all that we are back next week. We have Julie Sweetland, who is from the Frameworks Institute, and she's going to talk to us about how to message equity findings in maybe a non-equity friendly environment. So it's very, very well timed. And you can always find out who's coming in any given week by looking at the Talking Data Equity homepage. And you can also suggest topics and guest speakers there. We do this because we want to provide you with useful information. So if you tell us what you want to talk about, we can do it better. So feel free to tell us what you want, and we will do our best to make that happen. And Rahul, it has just been such good timing in all of the turbulence, the politics in Canada, the politics in the United States. It's just been so nice to spend an hour hearing about sustainable, concrete ways to really kind of move the needle in a way that will work regardless of what sector you're in, what kind of budget you have, what kind of political environment you're in. And so thank you for all the work that you're doing. And
Yeah. Well, shout out to all the people on the call doing that in public spaces. Stay safe, and I appreciate you and the work you all do. So thanks for the
yeah,
time.
great. All right, we're going to leave it there and take good care of yourselves and each other. Have a great weekend, and we will see you soon. Bye, everybody.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye.